Audio unleashed. All right. Well, why don't we start with some reader email then, man? Or is it email? No, it's comments. Reader comments.
Don't we need a zinger to start the show with?
I think the zingers are your job. What's your zinger? What kind of zinger do you have for us this week, buddy?
Nothing.
Okay. That's quite the zinger. It was an anti-zinger.
Nothing.
All right. Can I just read this comment from Jay Hader then?
Yeah, hit it.
Okay, so this is a comment from Jay Hader, one of our patrons. He left on our last episode in which we talked about the new Revel Performa 4 series. And if you want to hear that segment, give us $3. We'll let you hear it. But anyway, here's what Jay said about that. Read the Performa 4. I wouldn't get your hopes up at the toppled MTM center. So what he's talking about there is I was talking about the fact that, with the Performa 3, I was a little disappointed to see the tweeter mid center channel design, which is, it can cause some problem. It was a whole thing. If you want to hear it, go listen to the segment. But he's talking about the center channel and my sort of thoughts on the design of that. And he says, at Axpona, their rep conceded that it was a check the box exercise, which is interesting. Then he goes on to say, surprised y'all liked the look too. To me, in person, they looked like mid-2000s Kef Q series with veneers from that era too. Performa 3 and Performa 3 BE look fresher to me. Also, the bookshelves are now packaged in pairs, so you can't do identical front bookshelves as you could with the M105, 106. He's talking about just using a bookshelf speaker as your center speaker. Also, no on-wall model for sides, rears, height. Some people, my wife, for example, would rather have something on the wall than a grill in the wall. They sounded fine, but they weren't my personal favorite monopole boxes of the show this year. Last year, the F328 was neck and neck with the Mo5 V10. On the plus side, he says, Performa B is still around. I thought the B supply issues, they'd be gone, but apparently not. So one can still get 3 M126BE for LCR. Now, with regard to the center channel stuff, I mean, I guess we kind of alluded to this, that it's like, does a center speaker, like who's buying those, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense to me that it's still a checkbox thing. But as to the looks, look, we were looking at renders for these things. We didn't see them in person. So, Jay, interesting to hear that in person, you didn't think they quite measured up. That's disappointing to hear just from the designs we saw from the renders, though. I liked the look of them, but if they, crappy veneers or whatever for the price, it's a little disappointing. So thanks for that field report, Jay.
So I had on my Facebook Messenger, Sean Olive, noted audio researcher, who used to work at Harman, and he said that, we were sort of, I was saying, I'm not sure where Harman products were designed, and I know they moved some of their design to India. And he told me that Mark Glacier, who has been working at Harman for ages, designed the new Revel series Performa 4 in Northridge, California.
Nice.
Although Mark just retired, and they have a new, younger engineer from JBL Pro taking over. All the higher-end JBL and Revel speakers are still designed in Northridge, but manufactured mostly in China. So I guess they still have a U.S. design element. They still have some of the same, I don't know, what's the, pedigree? Good word?
Yeah. Good insider information. They should have put that in the press release.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough for reader comments. Yeah.
No, wait. Can I do shameless self-promotion?
Always.
My album Plaid Pants is number 6 on the Roots Music Report Jazz Albums chart.
No freaking way, dude. That's awesome.
Yeah, go listen to it, people.
Heck yeah, man.
On all streaming services and Bandcamp page and stuff like that.
You guys still aren't pressing vinyl, are you?
And we never will.
Oh, I meant to tell you, man, I'm finally getting a vinyl copy of the Polyphonic Sprees Together We're Heavy, which is an LP I've always wanted, but it's it's like cost $200. So they pressed it once, and they used the Disney Records logo because technically the pressing plant they used had the rights to use that, and then Disney sued the heck out of them, so it was never actually released. But a company in England pressed 150 copies these for Record Store Day, and I actually ordered one, and it cost me more to get it shipped from the UK than it did to pay for the record. So, but I finally have a copy coming. So, you know what? If they can do that, then you could do plaid pants on vinyl, man. Come on.
They'd just be sitting around my house.
One of them would be sitting around my house.
If we were doing gigs and we could sell them on the bandstand, that'd be one thing. But just go listen to one cut. Then we get like one ding on Spotify, and eventually we'll get to 1,000 listeners. Or no, just 1,000 listens, not 1,000 listeners.
And you'll get like 3 cents.
That's our goal, is for Spotify to have to send us a check for 3 cents.
That would be amazing. Damn the man. All right, let's talk about audio, buddy. What do you want to start with this week?
We are going to start with Audio Science Review, which we don't talk about all that much here and there. Yeah. Very super measurement heavy website. Yeah. And Amir, who's the guy who runs it, did what he calls his first clickbait video, which is titled $4,000 audio cable versus $7 with 3 exclamation points after it. But he actually does some testing of a $4,000 audio, really in-depth testing of a $4,000 audio cable with his Audio Precision to see what the results are and see if there's any plausible claim to the ideas of audible differences among cables. And he does a really deep dive on it, unlike almost anybody who writes about this stuff or does any kind of media about this stuff. He really goes into depth about like, okay, look, this is what's audible. And this is what this thing does. Yeah. And he shows you in there. So we're gonna dig into that a little bit.
Not to come for your job or anything like that, because you're normally the master of segues here, but that leads perfectly into the second topic we're going to talk about today, which is another article from John Darko. We're talking about Darko a lot these days, but he's out there making waves. So this is another article on his website, darko.audio. It's called Global Feedback, The 2 Phases of Snake Oil. So this started with an interesting premise. This is Darko posted a poll on his Facebook page, and the poll said this: there are 2, and he's got 2 in all capital letters. There are 2 possible definitions of snake oil. Which one do you subscribe to? He's got one definition of, does nothing for sound quality, tantamount to fraud, and the other definition that he will allow as possible is a very high price for very little improvement, ergo very poor value. And that, he claims, covers the entire spectrum of what could be considered snake oil. And we're gonna deconstruct and talk about it. And I don't know, man, I suspect this might be one of those episodes where you and I have some friendly disagreements. But
maybe it won't be friendly. We got to amp it up, man. We got to amp up the excitement.
Anyway, what do you want to talk about after that?
We're going to do the deepest technical dive of this whole episode. This is the Western Electric Room at Axpona. And Axpona just happened. Was it last weekend?
Yeah.
And the biggest audio show in the U.S. now. Well, not kind of. It is the biggest audio show in the U.S. now. Yeah. And the cool thing about this was I've been kind of interested in Western Electric products because, like I said, I keep getting online ads from Upscale Audio, and I keep seeing all these products that look preposterous to me. So I keep clicking on them going like, what is this thing? Yeah. And I found this Western Electric stuff. These guys started making tubes again, So I was interested in this because they have a new super high powered amp. But the weird thing is, normally when we have a preamp feeding a power amp, you have a low impedance output feeding a high impedance input. Okay. And we'll go into what some of this stuff means and why we do this. But this one is power matched. So it's 600 ohms output feeding a 600 ohms input. So it's a fun topic to talk about for me, at least. And I just like impedance, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you understand impedance, you can really kind of think you're way past a lot of the BS that happens in the audio industry. And then for our Patreon listeners.
For our Patreon subscribers, we're going to be talking about a piece that we could have honestly picked from any number of sort of, I wouldn't call them mass market, but, the big websites that cover, home theater still for a more general audience. So this one that we picked, or that you picked, is actually by Ty Pendlebury from CNET.
Yeah.
And it is called Denon's new AVR S980H breaks receiver drought for home theater fans. And what Ty's talking about there is like, it's been a while since we had really any major new, AVRs coming out. I run the AVR guide for Wirecutter, and boy, we've had slim pickings for testing for a while now. I mean, we've brought in some weird stuff just because there wasn't much else to test. But it seems that, Denon and Rants are finally back in the game after the Harman acquisition, and they're releasing stuff. And boy, howdy, people are excited. I mean, they are really excited, or at least they're writing stories that would indicate that their excitement. I don't know if it's genuine, but we're going to deconstruct. We're going to talk about this AV receiver. We're going to talk about what it means and whether it's worth getting excited about. We'll dig into that for patrons. So let's talk about audio cables, though, man.
All right.
So this is a YouTube post from March 25th. $4,000 audio cable versus $7. Now, we should be clear right off the bat. We're not talking about speaker cables. We're talking about RCA cables. We're talking about a $4,000 RCA cable from Kinder Cable and a $7 Amazon Basics RCA cable. I know we kind of give, not Amir himself, but we give Audio Science Review a little bit of grief because, we joke that they're, audio data review, that they're, SINAD reductionists and whatever, and it leaned too hard into measurements without really talking about what they mean. But in this case, I thought Amir did a really, really good job, not only with the technical stuff, but also with just explaining what it means in real terms and whether or not some of the measurements are informative, which ones are, which ones aren't, why not. I think if you want to really understand Amir's whole position on measurements, at least with regard to cables, this would be a good place to start, because I think the nuance in this one might actually, I don't know if it would surprise anybody, but I think it would probably contradict a lot of the caricatures of Amir that are out there.
Yeah, because he's very good-natured going into this. He's not like a lot of the guy. I mean, sometimes he's like this, but like a lot of the sort of debunker type of guys have been kind of a little nasty sometimes. But he's going into this with a real attitude of hey, look, let's just see what happens, and he's kind of enjoying the whole thing. Yeah, which is really nice. It's actually my favorite video I've ever seen from him.
Yeah, me too.
And first of all, I will say I use these same Amazon Basics cables.
Me too.
They're great. They're really well made. They seem to hold up pretty well. And I've got several of them right here that power my noise canceling testing rig.
And they're not as stiff and unwieldy as the comparable monoprice, which I'd rather use the monoprice because I hate giving Amazon any credit for anything anymore. But it's just really good for the money. They're nice and flexible. They're just good cables, man.
Well, I'm not a big monoprice fan either.
Yeah.
But what I like is he talks a lot about, he shows you okay, here's the noise floor, for example, with the Kimber cable versus the Amazon cable. And then he says, okay, here's the noise floor with just the Audio Precision's inherent noise floor. Because, measurement gear has its own noise floor.
Yeah.
Right? And he's basically showing this is all, both of these cables, it's all basically the same as the inherent noise floor of the Audio Precision. They have lower noise than the Audio Precision does.
Yeah.
And he talks about how, here's what's audible. And this is another more shameless promotion, in the test that we did for the Audiophile Society speaker test disc, where you have a noise floor test and you, Dennis Berger, say minus 20 dB, minus
scale.
30 dB, full scale. You can actually hear what it sounds like if you're at minus 80 dB or something, right? And this stuff is down at minus 120.
Yeah.
Right. So,
well, you say that you can hear what it sounds like when you're at like minus 80 dB, but maybe you can. If the conditions
if you put on headphones and crank it up really loud, you could probably hear it. But you can't, in a normal stereo system in a normal room, you cannot hear it.
Yeah.
So, and we're 40 dB below that. And he talks a lot about that. One thing I also liked is, this has been my pet peeve for a long time, is that a lot of these high-end cable companies, some of the construction is fairly bad. And, if you're Belden or Canary or Mogami or somebody like that, right? You're supplying a ton of cable, and the people in your audience your customers just want the cable to work.
Yeah.
That's all they care about.
Yeah.
Whereas if this is a Kimber cable, right? So if you're them, if the cable is not reliable, maybe not such a big deal, because you can make a claim that it's great. And maybe it's like a race car, If you want the maximum performance, you can't, But, he points out like the RCA connectors in here, and this is another just crazy thing. So they make, instead of having a metal shield all the way around the center pin, they just have like one little tiny point of contact, and then it's all like plastic. The Kimber. It's all like plastic around it, which electrically does nothing for you. Right?
Yeah.
Nothing. It seems to me like both of the connectors should be the same size. Right?
Yeah.
And so they just do that without any electrical basis that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Without any reasoning, without anything. You're not losing shielding, because the whole jack, everything around the jack is all metal. So you're going into a fully shielded metal jack with a single conductor from a wire that's soldered to that single conductor.
Yeah.
So what the hell is the difference?
Well,
it's like, okay, so your solder point is inside the plug instead of inside the jack.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny though to me that's what you're focusing on. Like, that's the hill you're dying on, because backing up a little, he's talking about the locking mechanism. It's like, this is like a locking mechanism for, look, if you're going to spend $4,000 on an RCA cable, like a locking mechanism, need a little extra, whatever. Although in this case, it's just a complete, piece of crap. And like, there's this piece that can come out, and if you lose that piece, you can't use these cables anymore, right? You might as well just throw away your $4,000 cables and go buy new $4,000 cables. And it's just like a cheap plastic sleeve kind of thing that, can easily come off. And then when it does, just say goodbye to your investment.
The cable companies they can't distinguish themselves with any verifiable claims of performance, unless you consider verification. Well, we sent these to some audio reviewer who we also took out to dinner or whatever, and we're giving them to him, and he says they're great.
Yeah.
That's not what I would call verification.
Yeah.
Verification would be if you sent the thing to someone like Amir and he says like, oh, wow, this actually works.
Yeah.
But you have to distinguish your product with something. And so you tend to go with some sort of esoteric construction and maybe proprietary construction or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you got to have something to distinguish it.
Yeah.
But it should be better, not worse.
Correct.
I mean, I've seen some of these things. Monster Cable used to do things where they had RCA cables, right? And they called it quasi-balanced because the shield wasn't soldered to the plug at one end of it. So you were supposed to plug in the one where the shield was connected, that went to your source, and the one where the shield was unconnected, it went to your destination.
Right.
And I should say your sink. And electrically, it's the same thing, right? The shield is still connected.
Yeah.
It's still connected to ground. The two conductors are still connected the same way. So it doesn't make any difference at all. And, I tested these things at Home Theater Magazine back in the day, and you could plug them in backwards and couldn't tell any difference. It's just these attempts to make the product more appealing, but that have no technical merit that I can see.
Yeah.
Or that anybody can demonstrate. It just goes on and like decades and decades. of this crap, but I'm glad that he jumped in here and pointed out some more things. I'm trying to remember, like, there's so much he went into that was really good.
Can I talk about some of my favorite parts of the video? Because
sure, please do. Yeah.
I worry that some people are going to miss my favorite aspects of this video because he does a very deep technical analysis, not only of the cable as sort of like a line level cable, but he also uses it as a coaxial SPDIF cable, right? And does additional digital testing. And, there's a lot of in-depth analysis that I think at some point, many viewers are going to be like, okay, I get it. Like, I get what's going on here. This is snake oil. So I'm done. I'm going to go watch a video about, I don't know, birds or something, right? The stuff at the end where he talks about the value of actual scientific testing and what that means, and goes on to deconstruct all of the sort of objections that people might have to good blind listening analysis is, in my opinion, some of the best stuff in this video, because he talks about, like, look, I've swapped out cables before and thought I heard a difference, right? And, it kind of depends on which one you plugged in first. You do this experiment, you got the $7 cable, you unplug it, you plug in this $4,000 cable, and all of a sudden it sounds better. He's like, but if you don't know which is which, you could do that in reverse. Listen to this, the $4,000 cable first, plug in the $7 cable and go, oh, I'm all of the inner detail and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, that's why blind testing is important. And then he starts, in my opinion, very kindly, conversationally bringing up the objections that people have to rigorous double-blind testing of, oh, that's not, I don't want to be hurried when I'm listening to my music. He's like, fine, take a day to do the test, then have somebody else swap the cables. You don't know what they've swapped it out for. Listen for another day. Listen as slow as you want. If you don't know which is which, right, that should be just as valid a test. And he's like, oh, he talks about like study size, basically how many samples you're doing, how many times are you swapping, and why it can't just be like one repeat, why it can't just be A, B, oh, this is better. He's like, flipping a coin, man. It could be like, if you get it right, it could be complete chance. So you need to do repeated testing. I just love the way he goes through and very kindly and gently, and almost like a Mr. Rogers way, takes all of the opposition to such rigorous double-blind testing and goes, guys, I'm sorry, it's just not valid. Again, we're looking at a kindler, gentler Amir here, but in many ways, I think that makes him a more effective Amir.
Totally. I love this video. I got such a giant kick out of this video. And when you sent me the link, I was like, oh God, I got to watch this. But it was really good. Everybody should watch it. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I think so too.
Everybody go watch this. This is his best video I've ever seen.
It's really, really good. Super good. More of this, Amir, please.
Please.
All right. We'll be right back, y'all.
And we are back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we're going to... Wait, aren't you supposed to be talking about this one? No, I am.
Am I? I don't know, man. Let's just roll with it.
We're here to talk about Darko's.
False dichotomies?
I don't know what that means.
I just joke about this. Like, I feel like sort of Darko's arrogant insistence that he's got the only two possible definitions of snake oil, and you simply must pick one, and that puts you into one camp or the other. And it's like, Oh no, man. That's this is like the whole article that follows indicates that this is kind of a fuzzy concept to begin with. So let's not get too high and mighty about I've got the only two possible definitions and you must pick one. You know?
Well, here's the thing: is he brings up a lot of good points in here, and this is why I wanted to talk about this so much.
Okay.
There's so many points he brings up in here that are really relevant to a lot of the stuff we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And, so he's basically saying, there's two definitions. The first one is snake oil does nothing for sound quality and is tantamount to fraud. The second one is snake oil is a high price charge for very little improvement, making it a very poor value, right? Anyway, 79% went with the strict definition. And
which is?
Which is snake oil does nothing for sound quality and is tantamount to fraud. Here's the problem I have with that statement, right? I know a lot of people in the high-end audio industry. I've known tons. I've met, at my very first CES in January 1990, I met with MIT Cables, just out of sort of morbid curiosity. And because I was a kid, I was coming out of mostly professional audio knowledge and doing PA and doing recording and stuff. And it's kind of like, cables really make a difference. And I kind of went and talked to him, and I was not convinced. Anyway, but it was interesting. And so, but I've known these people forever. And so he's basically saying that, like, if your product does nothing for sound quality, you are a fraud. But fraud means that you have to know that you're defrauding people, right?
Yeah, which is a point that he makes.
Otherwise, it's just stupidity or something, or ignorance or delusion. I think delusion is probably the best thing to say here, because so many of these people in the high-end audio industry genuinely believe that their stuff is great. Okay, and genuinely believe they're making a difference. All these cable companies we've been talking about, right? What's their testing? If they really wanted to find out, like, does this make a difference, they do, rigorous blind testing as well as measurements and be like, wow, did it deliver a difference? Well, no, it didn't. So this is why they do the tests that Amir's talking about, where they sit down and they listen to the old cable and they listen to the new cable and they're like, oh, B is better. Right? Yeah. They genuinely believe it, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of a cable manufacturer I've met, and I've met a lot. Probably most of the ones you could name. I can think of one who I'm kind of convinced that a lot of the time he did not believe in what he was doing, but I'm not going to name who that is.
Yeah.
But I could say, if you are listening, if you are a cable manufacturer and you are listening to this podcast, it's not you. Because the person in question, there is no way he would listen to this podcast.
There you go.
So I kind of think that, like, so many people just really believe in this stuff. And so it's not fraud. It's a lack of, scientific and intellectual rigor.
Yeah.
I also think, like, so many of these people just don't understand music. And it's like, and they think, God, music depends on this little teeny, tiny difference. And it just doesn't. In any recording session, they're making 1,000 tiny decisions that they don't even pay any attention to that make a much bigger difference than anything that's going to happen with cables.
Yeah.
They move a mic an inch. That's going to be more than the cable affects it. And they think nothing of it.
Yeah. I mean, you're bringing up an interesting point in that, like, and something you said previously was a lightning bolt to my head with regard to this piece, when you were like, I'm not going to call you, a liar. I'm going to say, in my opinion. But, like, at this point, if you're going to call somebody a fraud, you're basically saying you can read their mind. I don't know. I feel like that's an unnecessary threshold. And also, I think one of the things that Darko does in this article is doesn't give enough credence to the notion of sometimes you're paying more for something where there's no claim of enhanced sound quality, where it's not a performance claim. It's a luxury thing. It's a materials claim. He's talking about the Utopia versus the Azurus. Is that how you would pronounce that, the Focal headphone?
I think so, yeah.
It was basically like, is the Utopia like snake oil because it's so much more expensive? Well, one is an open back, the other's a closed back, so it's kind of hard to compare them. But, like, with the Utopia, a lot of the selling point on that, as far as I can see, is the materials. It is the presentation. It is the connectivity. It is the better case. I mean, just look at the travel case for those two, and you can tell they're presenting them very, very differently. And now I understand any Focal headphone is a luxury headphone, but there are tiers of luxury here, and the Utopia is specifically designed, I think, to be a truly luxury experience. I'm looking over Focal's website, and they talk about the technologies and things like that, but they're not claiming that these are the reasons that it's so much more expensive, So.
Right. Well, I just want to say, with high-end audio products, there's always a sort of pro forma claim of superior performance. If you're spending more money, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I mean, they kind of have to do that in the same way that politicians have to tell you certain things to get elected that are just preposterous. But they got to do that to get elected, right? Sort of like the guys making sound bars and they had to claim 1,000 watts or something when it's like, no, it doesn't deliver that in any kind of standardized, realistic testing. But yeah, maybe if you do this and that, you get to do 1,000 watts. But it's like, I remember our friend Chris Walker, who's now at ELAC and was at Pioneer, was lamenting this to me. He's like, sometimes with amplifiers and stuff, you have to make these extravagant claims. And he's like, I just try. It's so hard not to do that, but it's hard to sell against somebody who's making the ridiculous claims. And so I think with high-end audio products, you have to sort of take these claims with a lot of, not a grain of salt, a shake of salt. And and I also wanted to say, I'm making you lose your train of thought, but whatever. I'm commandeering this.
It's okay.
So
you've got seniority. You do it, man.
Okay, I do, man. Another thing he keeps saying is, he's comparing like a 5,000 euro loudspeaker cable. If it sounds more open and airy, or if it measures better than a 50, it's like, okay, first of all, the $5,000 loudspeaker cable does not sound more open and airy than the $50 one, and it doesn't measure any better.
Yeah.
Now, and then he's like, is a 10,000 euro amplifier snake oil when a 1,000 euro one sounds 90% as good? Except,
that's the point I was about to make when you cut me off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
On, man.
All right. The ball's in your court, man.
I mean, it's just like, how would you even qualify? Number one, probably you probably couldn't identify one from the other in a blind test, unless.
No, you couldn't.
Unless I was about to say unless the 1,000-pound one has got some output impedance problems or doesn't have sufficient current from its power supply or something like that. Maybe it can't power through the impedance swings of your speakers. But a 1,000 euro amplifier probably is not going to have power supply issues, probably not going to have output impedance issues. So the 10,000 euro amp and the 1,000 euro amp, as long as you're level matching them, you're not going to hear the difference. So what is this 90% is good crap? This is, in my opinion, this is the biggest beef I have with Darko. He's always doing everything he can to leave room for the fact that more expensive means better, and that frustrates me with him because he wants to pretend that he's not that guy. He wants to pretend that he doesn't do that, and yet he always leaves plausible deniability, and that frustrates me, man.
Always. Well, that's standard practice in the high-end audio journalism. But I got to point out that the 10,000 euro amplifier is probably more likely to have problems.
Oh, that's a really good point.
than the 1,000 euro one, because they start incorporating stupid things, stupid, ridiculous nonsense that doesn't work that people wisely abandoned 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But, you got to start to do that kind of stuff if you want to differentiate your product.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't think of a lot of 1,000 euro amplifiers that aren't pretty great. Maybe like there are like some kind of like Chinese made tube amps that are like $800,000. I don't know how to translate to euros, that probably are okay-ish, but probably have some issues. I've measured a couple of those, not the 800, more like the cheaper ones than that. And I mean, I remember I had one that was push-pull EL84s, 2 per channel, and it was rated at like 10 or 15 watts a channel, which with EL84s, that's, a pair of them in push-pull, that's 12 watts, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But it struggled to make 3 watts because it was it was a mess.
Yeah.
But but sound still came out. It sounded fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, generally, like when you're talking about €1,000 amplifier, you're talking about, I don't know, a Parasound or an NAD or
Sure.
something good, Cambridge Audio, something that's going to work. You don't have to worry about.
Absolutely, man.
So,
have you ever talked about the origins of snake oil before?
We have not. We probably should.
Snake oil actually worked, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the whole snake oil thing comes from Chinese laborers who were brought to the U.S. to work on the rail lines, right? Mm-hmm. And they of course brought with them traditional Chinese medicine, and they would make snake oil a tonic, and it was specifically made from the Chinese water snake, fat from Chinese water snake. And it legitimately had anti-inflammatory properties and was high, and we know this now, but didn't know it then. They didn't know what omega-3 fatty acid was, but it was very high in omega-3 fatty acid, and it was legitimate Chinese medicine, right? Well, they start using it, and then basically Americans were like, we're going to make rattlesnake oil then, and we're going to claim it cures everything. And then eventually they just started selling mineral oil as snake oil, right? And that's how the whole association, because it was around the time, like many decades later, there started to be like regulations on medical related stuff. And it turned out that most of what was being sold as snake oil at the time was just like mineral oil. But that's how snake oil got a bad name. But the original roots of it in Chinese medicine, the original snake oil brought to U.S. shores legitimately had medicinal properties. And I just think that's so ironic that we use snake oil as basically a synonym for fraud now, where it was not the snake oil that was the problem. It was the fake snake oil that was what we would call snake oil.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Maybe that's what happened with cables.
Okay, wait, show your work. All right.
So like when Noel Lee, who I think kind of gets credit for inventing the high-end audio cable business, maybe he found, 50 years ago, whenever that was, maybe he found some kind of really exotic dielectric that was perhaps from China. And, but made back in the communist era of China when it was all weird. And it was weird. And they didn't really have a manufacturing industry. Everything was kind of handmade there at the time. So maybe they had like some kind of really weird hand-drawn plastic dielectric. And he put that in there and actually made a difference. But then when people started to go like, oh, people will buy high-end cables, they just started putting some other crap in there and calling it something. And that's probably what happened. And then all the differences went away.
I don't think I'm convinced, buddy.
This has to be what happened.
It has to be, huh?
I'm just making up stories.
I know.
No.
I think that's indicative that we've probably been on this topic long enough, though, don't you think?
Yeah. And also, I'll say, I've seen the very early monster cables, and they were basically just fat zip cord.
Yeah.
They're a big fat zip cord.
Yeah.
So, and, granted, if you had a big fat wire versus a really skinny one, that produces a measurable difference in the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
I measured it all. It does.
Yeah.
So,
Good deal.
But, is it better or worse sounding? I don't know.
No. All right. Well, speaking of better or worse sounding, let's take a break, get some water, and come back and talk about Western Electric, man.
Yay.
All right. We'll be right back, y'all. And welcome back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
Nice. That was a
Bless
little
your
Ellie
heart.
Mae. That was a little Ellie Mae, man.
Yeah.
Do you have a cement pond now? Does anybody under the age of 50 get that reference?
No.
Oh, sad, man. That's what's wrong with these kids today. So anyway, this time around, we are talking about Axpona 2026, which we did not attend, but we are talking specifically about Stereophile's coverage of the Western Electric Room at Axpona 2026, written by Miguel Barrio. And he is, let's throw some numbers out there of what he's talking about here. So the system that is in this room, and I'm a bit confused on one point. I'm going to need some clarification from you because I feel like you know more about this system than I do. But so anyway, it's the Western Electric 203C CD player for $12,000, 91E preamplifier, he says, for $8,000. I thought the 91E was an integrated amp, though, and looking at the pictures, it looks exactly like the company's integrated amp that I know. I'm just wondering if they weren't using their integrated amp as a preamp. I don't know.
I would guess so. Yeah.
And then the 100E monoblock amplifiers, $150,000 a pair, and A2 speakers, $140,000 a pair. Yeah. Now, there's often a lot of excess in Stereophile's coverage of these shows because there's often a lot of excess at these shows. But what stood out to you in particular about this article, and why'd you want to talk about it?
Okay, well, you look at the picture, and the picture is like, okay, there's some wacky looking speakers that probably don't work, but whatever. You see that a lot at these shows, but these monoblock amplifiers are just amazing. Yeah, they look like they're sort of roughly standard, 19 inches wide or whatever, somewhere in there. But they must be
3 feet deep.
Oh, yeah, or something close to it.
Yeah.
It's hard to, you can't really tell from the picture, but they are humongous. And so what's sort of, it's still not going to be the thing I'm talking about, but what's sort of special about them is that, they're rated to put out 160 watts.
Yeah.
Under what conditions? We're not told. But they're single-ended triodes. And, normally single-ended triode amps put out 10 watts, 12 watts. It's just one tube putting it all out, not two tubes, push-pull, nothing like that.
Right.
And so normally, though, you really can't get a lot of power out of these things. But in this case, they're using a ginormous tube, which is called a 308B output tube. They're 13 inches high. They run at a plate voltage of 1,500 volts. So, I will say, the metal work on this amp is spectacular. I mean, it's a whole different creation. It's just crazy. And a lot of that money, look, there's just no way to do this metal work for cheap.
No.
So, that's a significant chunk of the money in this. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars.
And the industrial design is just staggeringly beautiful. I mean, these things are just cool looking.
Yeah, if you want a pair of cool looking amps, this is certainly one you could look at. If you think that like, the Dan D'Agostino Master Audio Systems is too understated for you, get these. So here is the weird thing that it's also got, instead of like different taps on the transformer, it's got swappable transformers, output transformers, right?
Yeah.
Which has got to be pretty big.
Yeah.
They're handling that kind of power. But what kind of struck me, which he just kind of glosses over, the power amplifier incorporates a balanced transformer input of 600 ohms, matching the preamp's 600 ohm balanced transformer output, which he just says is yet another uncommon approach.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to dig into that and why we don't do that.
Yeah.
So normally with a preamp, right, the output impedance, it could be as low as, I think probably 7 or 8 or 10 ohms is the lowest I've ever seen. I've seen it as high as over 1,000. I think I found a Denon receiver and I was measuring something, God, decades ago, and it had like 1,000 or 1,200 ohm output impedance. Why, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they did. But
Yeah.
not a problem if you have at least. So typically, what we do in audio, and if you go to sengpielaudio.com, and we'll put a link in, they have a lengthy explanation of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Typically, what you do is you have a low output impedance driving a high input impedance.
Mhm.
And the reason that you do this is it's the maximum transfer of voltage. In other words, the output device chews up almost none of the voltage because it's only a few ohms. Maybe it's 100 ohms, 60, 75, 50. It's not much. It's not chewing up most of the voltage. Most of the voltage goes down the line, and then it hits that 20,000 ohm, 47,000 ohm, 100,000 ohm input impedance, and all the voltage gets chewed up there, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So all the voltage goes down the line. But with this, it's what they call a balanced interface, right? Or I shouldn't say it's power balanced, right? So this is how you get the maximum transfer of power, not voltage, power,
Right.
from one to the other, is to have the output impedance match the input impedance. And this was really common back in the really old days of headphones, right? When amplifiers were expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And there were no cheap amplifiers in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And they were all built largely by hand, and using transistors that were expensive at the time.
Yeah.
And so, I'm
going to just want to interrupt you real quick. I'm sorry, but that makes something make sense for me, because the only time I've ever really encountered a system like this was an old archaic, and I honestly kind of thought it was just cobbled together, intercom system at the church that I grew up in, because I did sound for the church, and there was an intercom system that was used between the sound booth in the sanctuary and the daycare room in the nursery. And it had basically, I think the amplifier for it was up in the sound booth, and it was a crappy little thing, but it was impedance matched there. And that's the only time I ever remember encountering a system like that. And I've always wondered why, but now I think I might understand why.
So a classic use of this is in crystal radios, right? Which are entirely passive, right?
Yeah.
And I had one when I was a kid. And so they're passive, so they're getting all their actual power is coming from the radio signal itself, coming down the antenna, right? Which is really weak. And so if you wanted the maximum power output, you'd use something like 600 ohm headphones, which I had, which came with my crystal radio. It was just a headphone. It just was on one side.
Yeah.
By the way, and you could listen to the radio. You could get a few stations in, and it worked. But back then, you were getting an audible signal just out of the air.
Yeah,
which is kind of like when Gilligan had his tooth come loose and he picked up the radio signal in his tooth.
Yeah,
which didn't actually ever happen. I think, I think it was some hoax or something, and they picked up on the writers for the show picked up on it.
Yeah,
came up with that as a plot point, and hey, it worked, man. But anyway, this is also common in RF, right? In like if you look at a SPDIF connection or a analog video connection, those are 75 ohms in and out.
Yeah,
right? And any RF kind of devices, it's going to be matched impedance on both sides, right?
Yeah,
because you're usually talking about pretty weak signals. But anyway, in audio though, we don't do that because we want all of the voltage to be chewed up on the sync end of it, right? The destination end. If you have a high output impedance in the source, right, it can interact with the capacitance of the cable and actually create a filter, right? It's not really usually a problem. And typically, we say that the output impedance of the source device has to be at least 10 times the input impedance of the destination device.
Right. Yeah.
For this to work correctly. And so if you have too high of an output impedance, it will create a filtering effect, right?
Yeah.
So you can get some high frequency roll off. It's not usually a problem. It's got to be pretty extreme. I think if you build like passive preamps, so-called passive preamps, which is just a potentiometer, right?
Well, and actually, you just brought up a point I've been wanting to interject real quick. So, like in the intro, I mentioned that this 91E, I think actually they're just using the company's integrated amp as a preamp here. Because I'm looking at it and I'm going, that's the 91E integrated amp. And why are they calling it a preamplifier? But they would do that if they're using it as such. But people who know me may be wondering why the heck I'm so familiar with an $8,000 preamp, because that's not normally my
good point.
But like I'm fascinated. I've been fascinated by this integrated amp for a long time because it actually uses a stepped logarithmic attenuator instead of what we would call a volume control. So it is technically like the preamp section of this thing is a passive preamp, isn't it? If it's using a stepped logarithmic attenuator? I mean, wouldn't that functionally be the same as a passive preamp? I mean, it's like a better potentiometer, really.
Only if there's no buffer. What matters is not the potentiometer, but the buffer either in front of it or behind it. Right. Somewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably behind it.
Okay.
So, but that's one of the reasons you can run into problems with passive preamps is they have a high output impedance, which can interact with your cable. And typically with passive preamps, you keep the cable really short, and it's not really a problem. But I will say also, there's another not so well known application of something kind of like this, and that's that Dan D'Agostino did it on his stuff. And although I never really fully understood what he was doing. He explained it to me, and he's trying to explain it. Apparently, he has like a high output impedance to a low input impedance, which supposedly eliminates any effects of the cables because all the impedance is on the source end. So the impedance of the cable, which is of course almost nothing, doesn't matter. I mean, of course, we know it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
But, the cable impedance would have to be really high to like if you had a 50-foot run of speaker cable that was, 20 gauge or something, right?
Yeah.
That could matter. But like in a normal audio system, the impedance of the cable just doesn't matter. Anyway, he had a high output impedance and a low input impedance. And he says, I'm struggling to understand this. He's like, Brent, it's just like AM radio. And I'm kind of like, that's not really like a quality statement.
Yeah.
But,
wow.
Dan's level of engineering understanding is far superior to mine. So I didn't question it, but I still never really understood it. I'm sure it all worked out. And I'm sure, because, all of his stuff measured great. It's all well engineered, but it's pretty esoteric. But yeah, so this is a weird thing. And I think they just did it to be old school.
I need to just drive over and ask these cats, man, because they're in Georgia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of times these kind of obviously this whole company is just basically exists to do things old school.
Yeah.
Right. So they could be going back to whether or not they fully understand the implications of it. They could be going back to this sort of retro idea of balanced power connections. I don't know, but it struck me as just weird and just another weird thing from high end. Oh, I guess it probably works. Didn't he say the sound? I mean, what stereophile writer? What's he going to say? The room sound?
Yeah. And then the fact that he just glossed over it so quickly indicates to me that he didn't put nearly as much thought into that statement as, you did before you dropped into the idea board. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just, to me, it's like what the hell? I still remember, the first person that told me that was Don North, who is a really good engineer who had his own speaker company for a while, and then I think he went to work for one of the Chinese ODMs. But he's the one that first explained all that to me, and I was like, "Oh, wow!" I did, because I was like, "Why?" Because he was the guy who first loaned me headphone measurement gear before I bought my own, and because I just had it sitting around doing like nothing. He said, "If you ever want to borrow it," oh yeah. And so, but anyway, I'm like, why do some of these headphone amps have high output impedance? He said, well, that was like, that's the way to get like the most power transfer, but not the most voltage transfer. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's just a weird thing. And like understanding, output impedance and input impedance and stuff like that is just kind of somewhat critical. It's probably more relevant in musical instruments because, guitars, electric guitars have, an output impedance that could be really high because they're going from a pickup that has an output impedance of 5 kilo ohms or higher.
Yeah.
To 7 kilo ohms. I've seen them over 10 into a 250K potentiometer, right?
Yeah.
So they can have a pretty high output impedance. That's why with a guitar you can't run a really long chord or you get roll off, right?
Yeah.
But that's why guitar amps tend to have an input impedance that's pretty high, like 100K or 200K or something like that.
Yeah.
It's also why a lot of like piezo pickups on acoustic guitars, before they started building all the preamps into the guitars, right? Or the piezo pickups that we double bass players use, which don't have a preamp. They don't have an acoustic double bass with a preamp. So if you plug into an amp that doesn't have a sufficiently high input impedance, you get this sort of clacky sound on top of all your notes, and it sounds pretty bad.
Interesting.
That's why amps that work good for electric bass don't necessarily work good for double bass, because the piezo pickup, I can't remember what the output impedance of them is. I think it's like well over 10K. It's a lot.
Yeah. One of my white whale guitars is actually a low impedance guitar. So the guitar,
Les Paul recording.
Les Paul recording. I always wanted one of those, and just once he died, they became just unattainably expensive, or at least last time I looked, they were. But I always wanted one of those because I thought it was just fascinating. Because being a deadhead, I'm sort of fascinated by low impedance guitars because Jerry plugged into freaking Macintosh amps, man. So Jerry played low impedance guitars and Phil played low impedance bass. So
didn't know that. But those came with a cable that had a built-in transformer.
Yes.
Because output impedance was like 600 ohms, I think. Just because Les Paul thought like the output impedance of the guitar should be the same as a mic, right?
Yeah.
And I will say I saw him perform at what was that club he used to play? Fat Tuesdays? No, back in the Fat Tuesdays.
Oh, okay.
Days. I saw him perform with a Les Paul recording and all kind of knobs and crap on it. Who knows what he did? He probably did. And then I got to interview him actually after that.
Oh, I'm so jealous. That's amazing, man. So
it was one of the best. I don't normally like interviewing celebrities, but that was one that was total fun. He was a total kick.
That thing had an 11 position rotary switch for tone control. So like discrete tone control, 11 stops on this rotary switch for tone control and like phase and stuff like that. It was crazy. Yeah.
And yet he always sounded like Les Paul.
He always sounded like Les Paul. Yeah. All right, buddy. Let's wrap this up and do some credits, man, and go talk to our patrons. You want to do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Well, you drew the short straw this week, so you're
okay. I'm editing.
Yeah. You want to do all the boilerplate stuff?
I'm editing this for ButterBurger Productions.
Good job, buddy.
In my capacity as co-founder and co-engineer and
visionary, idea man,
visionary,
talent,
No, just because I don't know. You have the voice talent, man. You're the voice. You're a professional voice talent now.
Yeah, but you're the interesting human being. So
I'm really not. I try not to be.
No, you failed at that.
Oh, the less interesting I am, the more happy I am. But anyway, that's a topic for another episode of Audio Unleashed.
Yeah.
But,
sounds like something out of the Tao of Pooh, man.
I don't know what we're going to do for music. Maybe I'll come up with something. If you hear something weird, it's a new Brent Butterworth song. Okay. Or if you hear something weird, it might be ButterBurger House Band. Who knows?
But I have
a band rehearsal. Yeah, I got a band rehearsal tonight. Which means I got to move all my recording stuff, and maybe I'll move it back, and maybe I'll bang out some weird sounding thing.
Cool.
Maybe I'll put some wire ties on my bass and make it microtonal.
Heck yeah, man!
Like Baby 504.
Technically, isn't your bass already It's infinitely microtonal, isn't it?
That was the first thing I did when I saw Angine de Poitrine. I'm like, I could do that, right? And so I grabbed my little fretless electric bass, which has lines where the frets would be. Yeah. Because then I know exactly where I am, and I tried to play a couple things that sounded like them. I'm like, oh yeah, you could do it.
Yeah, nice. So, all right. Well, let's wrap this up and go talk to our patrons. But everybody else, we appreciate each and every one of you. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.